first thing I want to do, for those of you who don't know, Rita Baragona and Naomi Nemtzow, they very kindly agreed to do this talk, rather than me talking about my word code, which is difficult for me, to make it more of a conversation, a relaxed conversation. So they've come up with some questions, and you should also know that I love these two women's work. They're very talented painters. They also are members of this gallery, the Gallery Galleries, for a much longer time than I've been a member. So they know the ropes. And here we go.
Here we go. So as Monica said, Rita and I will start out with some questions for Monica. And we know you're also going to have some questions and things you'd like to contribute. So we're going to ask you to hold on to those thoughts for a little bit, but please don't forget them. And we will open the floor after a bit. So I would like to start by saying, when I got your card, Monica, and I had seen some of the work before, I was struck with what a very specific title you gave the show. And the title is An American Desertscape and an East Coast Suburban Swimming Pool. That's pretty specific. And so I knew there must be some thinking that went into giving the show that title.
Yes. Apart from the fact that that's basically the subject matter, it's based on, number one, a cross-country trip that my husband and I took in late 2017. And we were about 2.5, 3 months on the road, crossing the country and mostly camping with a tent. So we were outside for much of the time, besides driving. To play many of the national parks and many of the major museums across the country, not all of them, but quite a few of them. And so that experience for me was I think everybody who's been to a national park and seen the expanse that's out there has been generally overwhelmed by this, especially if you're an East Coast person. Especially if you're someone like me who grew up in the canyons of New York City on the Upper West Side. That experience is just kind of very opening, and as a painter, experiencing that space is just a tremendous revelation. In contrast to the pool paintings, which are reference to house in Connecticut that we inherited from my parents with a backyard pool, which is something that my parents had this house for many years, and our kids spent a lot of time in the pool. They learned how to swim there. We had family from Europe come and spend summers there with us, so it has a history for me. And being able to spend summers once again, having retired in that place, made me look at that pool and start to have some feelings about it, both historically and just visually, because I'm swimming every day at the end of the day, working in the studio during the day, and swimming at the end of the day, and just the sensation of being in that space was, again, something just very moving for me. And so these are basically just two experiences that I have been working on over the past, most of these paintings actually are from 2018, but so it's something that I've been working on together. And as I thought about putting together a show, I thought it would be kind of interesting to take the two subjects and see how they work against each other, because they really are about two different parts of the country in a way. And at the same time, I was exploring ways to express that would make it my own. And so that is basically the reason I was so specific about the subject matter, rather than saying something like recent paintings, which is kind of boring. And I think subject matter is important ultimately. What you choose to paint ultimately says something about who you are as an artist, for better or for worse. I hope that kind of gives you an answer.
That's great.
So you're talking about who you are and wanting to express something you felt about these two experiences. Can you elaborate a little bit more and maybe be specific about particular paintings? Because I think,
Well, let me start with the pools because it's a little simpler thought process for me. As I said, I was swimming every day, and the thing that I was becoming very aware of as I was interacting with this pool was just the kind of color sensations that I was experiencing in terms of this expanse of water that reflects the light, and then what comes into your periphery as you're moving through it. So this idea of color really started to engage me in terms of how I could translate that into painting. And because I have had a practice of doing abstract cutouts over many years, basically trying to explore the relationship of color and shape, and the levels, how to express space on a very shallow surface, and kind of understand my relationship to these things purely as a language almost. I began to think that I could somehow distill that experience of color and shape with this subject matter. So probably there's two paintings, one on the far end of that wall, for those of you who have looked at the show. It's very much more distilled than some of the other paintings in terms of shape and color. And then the little painting in the middle of that back wall there, near the desk.
I love those paintings.
That was kind of the way I was thinking in terms of taking the idea of the pool. The pool as an idea rather than the pool as something that reflects people and the experience of a sort of illusionistic experience, rather than it should be translated and distilled from memory.
So good. So let's stay with that for a minute. And I think you certainly distilled. I think most of us who think in this kind of language, if we look at some of your preparatory work, or we look at the work you've hung on the walls, we see and feel that distillation. I was wanting to ask you about the evolution of how you use color. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Monica's work since we were graduate students together in the 1970s. And I've seen many manifestations that are all Monica, but it's been a very fascinating journey. So when I first knew your work, the color was much more tonal, and you were using the color to basically sculpt and model, illusionistically of course, on the surface to give us very three-dimensional representation. And now we're looking at color that's very different from that. Could you talk about that?
That's really like going over a long history, but I'll try to keep it general.
Okay, we're gonna.
You could even just talk to
hop.
Well, no, I mean, yes, it's true. My training is very academic, and as Petey told me recently, I didn't know this about Boston University, but Boston University is called Bernumber.
Oh, Bernumber.
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 Bernumber, because apparently we didn't learn too much about color. That's not entirely true. We did learn a little bit. We learned that, you know, we had our basic design and design 101 or whatever they call it course. So we did learn a little bit about color relationships and the chromatic scale and all that sort of thing. But we produced a lot of burnt umber paintings, I guess. But yes, my early days were very limited. I wouldn't say they were totally limited in color, but they were on a very more neutralized scale.
But the color was effective in those paintings. It didn't have, I mean, now you're using much more heightened color.
Absolutely.
So maybe what I wanted to ask you was talk to us a bit about the heightened color and how you perceive the heightened color.
So because of that early experience in school, I identified myself as someone who was not very good with color. And I was interested really in form, and so I explored that. You know, I was an observational painter for many, many years. I explored that. I did mostly I was a still life painter, although I did some portraits, figure paintings, and interiors, and some landscapes. Yes, I did have some landscapes in my way back history. But so for me, it was always a struggle to work on in hierarchy colors, and really to see in terms of pure color. And at a certain point in my life as a painter, I decided to give up working from observation. I mean, I went cold turkey. And the way I approached it was, I was looking, I hope this doesn't get into too much, go for it, yeah. I was looking for my own, what I'll say, handwriting in painting. So when we paint from observation, there is something that we all do that is specific to the way we work. Whether you're drawing or you're painting or whatever, sculpting for that matter, there is a thing that you do with your tools and your hand and your mind's eye that you always want to do this thing, the way you make a curve or the way you draw a straight line. So what I did for quite a while was just work on drawings, like doodles basically, just doing a lot of drawings that were forms, that were my forms, that were just, it started off as shape, and then it started off as forms, and then it evolved into forms that were modeled, and they became these kind of odd-shaped structures that really, I didn't think had anything to do with what we see, what I was seeing in my surroundings, but I did notice that since nature is so complex and varied, you think you're making something up, and then you find out that there's something that looks just like that in nature. In any case, that was the beginnings of my feeling that I had to work from memory. Not that I had to give up the natural world, but that I had to really find something within myself that I could put into the painting. So that also came through in terms of pushing the color. Now I felt sort of freed up to just do any old thing. I've always done collage, even when I was painting from observation. And as I developed the collage and cutouts, that helped me really to start putting color together in a way that I began to make relationships that were pure color relationships that seemed to resonate and vibrate. I was very interested in the vibrations of color, and that's evolved into some of the things that you're seeing on the wall, and some of my abstract cutouts, of which there are many, 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 many. It's a practice for me in the sense of, I play the piano, so if you're going to do studies,
Sure.
churning, which I hate, but if you're going to do Chopin etudes or whatever, it's like a study, and it can be beautiful, but that's how I see it. And they sort of feed into the thinking of these memory paintings.
So I see in terms of the memories and the way you're using color that there's a huge emotional response to the memory of light in all of them, and also space. In the swimming pools, the sense of the light of the pink or salmon, whatever color that is, and the green of an ordinary swimming pool that's just cement with some green grass around it, I find really extraordinarily moving in my gut. And I thought if you could talk a little bit more about your memory of the color that you saw in in the natural world, but also how you translated it into your sense of color. So,
In this painting, specifically, you'll see this in other paintings as well, this particular pool is surrounded by a white patio that's very much wider than those skinny strips, the pink strips. But, so when you're looking at a big area of color, then colors that are in the periphery or surrounding it tend to be modified by your visual perception of the colors of the blue. Turns that white, the blue and the turquoise and the green, turns that white into a slightly pinkified deck. But of course, since I was interested in pumping up the experience, everything went to a heightened level of color. And I can also make a corresponding metaphor from, in music or in theater, where in order to project something, you work from different levels of expression in terms of the way the voice is used, larger or softer, or you are modulating tones in other way, the same way you would in a painting. Music, it's the same thing. And in terms of color of trees, that they're purple, you will look at trees sometimes and you'll see they're moving towards the violet. They're basically, we say they're brown because they look, to our eye, they won't look like that. But if you push the color somehow, it gives it just a more resonance.
You think it
there's
gets
a certain vibration of color that I think we respond to just as people. It works on us. It's like, I was saying this I think last week when we were talking. You go outside at the end of the day. You're out in the woods. And it's that beautiful golden light, right, at the end of the day, and it's hitting everything in such a way, and that orangey color that you're perceiving is what the energy that's coming from the sun and hitting certain things and intensifying the color. I don't know, I'm sure that most people have this sense of there's something glorious that you internalize about that. And so that's part of what using color to create that kind of emotion, I suppose, is
So talk about the emotions in the nighttime ones, because that's a different experience.
Right, so at night, this is a real distortion of the experience of seeing at night. But the pool, this particular pool has lights inside it. So at night, if you turn on the lights and it's dark out, it is like this glowing experience of these these greens and turquoises that are, it's very beautiful to look at. And also it sort of reminds me of that fascination one has as a kid with a swimming pool, that you see that pool and it's just like the most inviting thing. So I was sort of thinking about that, but then everything else around that light is completely almost black or dark. I mean, there is no color. And so how do you make a painting out of that experience, that visual experience? You have to find some color. And I really don't think that my eyes got so used to the light that I saw those colors there. But since I kind of know the way, well, I'm learning how color works, I was finding the equivalencies that I saw in the daytime in those same areas of space, the shrubs and the deck. So the deck turned from pink to purple, and the high key green turned to a more olivey color, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's talk about shape a little bit. When I look at your pool paintings, one of the things that strikes me is when you're looking, is where you got your shapes, basically. And you've always been very inventive in your creation of shape, both your observation and your creation of shape. Contrasting it with the desert paintings, where we've got these very intricate shapes of the rocks. And I'm sorry, this is an aside. It seemed when Monica went out west to these deserts that she had, as you alluded to earlier, found the landscape that looked just, or very much like shapes you'd invented. The pool, the water, the concrete, the shapes were not there in as explicit a way, and it seems to me that you had to find them. And I'm wondering if you would talk about how you found the shapes for the pool paintings.
Well, the pool itself, when you look into pool water in the daytime, and usually pools have some sort of filter, they have a,
Nothing seltzer bomb.
ghost. They have jets that make the water move so that it stays clean and everything. So when you look at the surface of the pool, it's really, Naomi sort of alluded to the fact that it may not be as complex.
Or at least, and I'm not a pool person, so.
Because, some of these rock formations are really complex, but in any case, the pool is actually filled with complexity of light and color because it's constantly changing. And there's ripples on the surface, there's shadows of the walls of the pool, there's other things outside that are affecting the color, where the sun is, what trees or shadows of trees are falling on the pool. So there's a lot going on in the pool. And I was not really too interested in that because what I was really aiming for was just this sense of pool.
It feels kind of iconic.
Yes, which is, I think that's what I was looking for, the pool as icon. This is something that is, I think I had these thoughts well after I had finished working on the paintings, but then I was looking at the two subject matters and thinking, kind of interesting, wet, dry, Eastern, Western, and all these ideas started coming up that, I must have been sort of responding to something in the subject beyond just the visual experience, my visual interests.
Mm-hmm.
Although I certainly was not thinking of that while I was working on it. So, so I was trying to distill the main elements of what the pool was to me. So, for example, the big wave in the pool, you'd have to have something like that happen with like a wave machine or something, or somebody jumping into the pool and really like a 300-pound person. So I was really just trying to make that into that wave, the painting in the middle there, that wave painting, into just really the idea of the fact that there is action on the pool. Same with that far painting, that on the far wall, where you have the cut paper acting as little waves. So, yeah, I was not really interested in the illusionistic quality of the light, the color light that you actually see in the pool. Is that answering something?
Yes, absolutely. I just wanted to come back to, Rita used the word iconic or icon, and so I was connecting that to what you said about this subject matter of the pool having so much emotional resonance for you, which you had told us a bit about, where your folks built the pool and your kids spent summers there. And you
Learn how to swim in the pool.
learned how to swim and grew up. And now you're coming back to it, and there's a lot of personal and family history that I think feeds that iconic quality. There's something, to me, very interesting, just to shift back to the desert paintings, because on the one hand, whereas this is familiar and you've lived with it for a lot of time over many years, the desert was a place you either hadn't been before or hadn't been much before, and yet, as we were saying, here are these rocks, and they look like something you'd invented 15 years ago. And I remember seeing, as you were traveling and you would put things up on social media, it was as if you had found the place that you'd invented.
Sort
So, maybe, possibly, because we've been skirting around memory. Memory is a complex thing. You weren't in the desert that long, and your memories of the past are being reflected in the desert in a way, because you only got a glimpse, in a sense. So I'm wondering if memory can be both the memory of you were doing it, the memory of the actual place, and also the memories of the past building on what you saw to create the memory of the now thing, the iconic thing. I had a question. I lost it as I was babbling. So it seems to me that maybe we should talk a little bit about the desert in terms of, did you find your shapes there? And maybe talk about the space.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe I have to say that none of these paintings, the desert paintings, actually look a whole lot like the paintings and drawings that I did from memory
Right.
in the early 2000s or late 90s. But there, I would have to say that the experience of being in the desert and also just the national parks with the rock formations that are just, for anybody who has a love of form. I mean, I'm married to a sculptor, so form is a big, important thing apart from in my own work or my own thinking, personal. But I think in terms of memory and the experience of traveling out west, it was such a powerful experience. Just as I had been to desert places before, never spent much time or much. I was not thinking so much about. My first experience with the desert was in Arizona, visiting my parents who were there for health reasons, and it was a place where there were these big saguaro cacti, and that sort of started thinking me about those kinds of forms, and that evolved into other things. But I mean, it's just I think it's the contrast of my experience in the Northeast, the kind of landscape that we live in, to be in that place, it's like a revelation.
When we were
And so
talking,
it's just the power of that experience that I was trying to remember through painting it. So that's where is the memory aspect might come in terms of how it relates to what I was doing in the early 2000s. I'm not so sure.
You're not feeling that way.
I'm not, well, maybe a little bit with the cactus drawings and things, but.
Okay, all right. But do you want to talk a little bit about process and the development? Because you put out some of the more preparatory work for us to look at and how those evolved to the ones on the walls.
Sure. Well, the pool paintings, there are no preparatory drawings, there are no preparatory, I mean, I did a few plein air paintings a few summers ago, but they're basically done straight, no preparation in terms of drawings or little paintings. You'll see most of these drawings, or little paintings, or big paintings, I did as a way of trying to understand the space with a little bit more of drawing illusionistically, a little bit more, trying to understand the space, because I was really, I had just very small sketches that I had done in sketchbooks that really don't even relate to the subject matter. I had tons of photographs, so I was referring to photographs, but not straight from the photos, just using pieces of things as reference. And so I would usually start with a drawing of the image that I wanted to develop, to really explore it so I understood it, so that I could then work from that as a jumping off point. So that's what you'll see if I put a painting or a drawing next to a work on the wall. It's more or less how I started with that. And then some other things these are both straight paintings in gouache, as well as sometimes I'm using cut paper, as I do in my abstract cutouts, collage. So I use that really for the first time. I've never done that, mixing the two things. So that was something that I was exploring with some of these paintings, not all of them.
And these are all gouache, right?
They're all gouache. And in terms of color, what we're talking about color-wise, I have used some Lumi colors. They're very intense colors that can't remember the brand name. It's not going to, doesn't matter. They're called Lumi colors. And so when you see Lumi, L-U-M-I, and they're not too many colors that come in luminous, they're basically luminous colors. There are oranges, reds, greens, yellow, pink, blue, but the blues aren't really luminous. It's very hard to find a very intense blue, as painters probably know. So I was either using them straight or mixing them in with regular wash colors, cadmiums and things of that sort.
so I love the transformation from this spatial illusionistic picture where you're going back into the sky space to the shapes, and I can see the relationship to this one where it's both flattened out and also incredibly spatial and has form. I don't think we have to talk about the comparison of the two, but I'd love to have you talk about the spatial relationships of the whole in the collage. You were talking about the sky when we were talking.
Well, because the way I worked this one up was I put probably 2 or 3 colors on the base, area of color for the sky, maybe with a little modeling in it towards the horizon, and then areas of color that represent this sort of sandy ground that you see out there, and some of the color that's affected by greenery, brush in the landscape out there. So on the right side, you see that kind of limey green.
Sure.
And then the shadows, which were sort of purplish on the ground as well as in the rocks. And so basically I just tried to translate from more explicit form to shape, and to find the color that in space that would work, that would bring it forward or set it back. And at a certain point, this is I think what you're referring to, I saw the sky was behind the rocks, and it was feeling too deep to me. So what I did was I cut some paper, get up and point to it. So I cut some paper here and here, and brought the sky forward in front of the rocks, basically. And so that kind of gives you an idea of the thinking that I was hoping to achieve in some of these paintings. But
It's so jazzy. I mean, okay.
well, I got it involved in other things.
Yeah. Something I observe in your work, even though, well, we've been talking about color, we've been talking about shape and form, there's so much animation in them. I look at the pool paintings and I look at the desert paintings with the rocks. Now these rocks weigh many, many tons, but as you're seeing them, I think I mentioned earlier, I almost feel like, they could start dancing anytime. And I feel that about the shapes you're using in the pool paintings as well. And I'm wondering, is that implied movement something that you think about, or is it just the result of having thought about other things?
I think that what happens to me sometimes is I start looking at these things like they're people. I mean, the rocks in particular. I start seeing, it's anthropomorphizing these things. So that comes out a bit. And it's just, it happened I did a whole bunch of tree paintings a few years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago. And it happens a lot in those, because you look at trees and they start to look like their arms, they're anatomical, so I think maybe that inclination tends to come out.
I also see solidity. So in
So
Naomi's,
it's both. It's both. I don't feel like the rocks are going to just float away into the ether, but at the same time, that implied movement.
well, it's jazzy. It's like kind of.
So there's directionality, I think, but I think now we've been talking a long time, and we could probably talk for hours. But let's let some other people ask questions and make comments.
I'll start off because, as I said, I have to leave soon,
Please.
unfortunately. But yeah, I'm really interested in I like the specificity of the subject matter, and what I find fascinating about the two themes is that there seems to be a kind of flip side of each other in the sense that one, to me, is making something very personal, particular, universal, i.e. the iconic swimming pool, and the other is making something universal, like nature, more personal. And I wonder if,
That's really cool.
That's interesting.
and so and also, I guess on just a personal note, one of the things that I wonder about as you were working on these, I would have been so intimidated by going in. I don't know how much time you spent in wherever that is.
That's Arches National Park.
Which one?
Arches.
Arches, okay. But it takes me a really long time to get into a subject. I mean, I would have, and so that to me would be really challenging to just sort of be driving across country and to say, okay, I'm going to do this series, but because like for me, I would sort of feel like, oh, unless I just stay here for a month or two, forget about it.
I totally feel you with that. Yes, I think those works could use a lot more development.
Mm. But well,
I mean,
they're
I want to
very
go back.
successful.
I want to go back because
and,
I kind of feel that.
Kudos to you for doing it, because I would have been totally intimidated by that. And I promise this is my last question, but just kind of what am I trying to say, related issue of that question is that you said you went cold turkey when you started working, not working from perception, but there's so much perception in all this work.
Oh, I didn't say,
Well,
from observation, in other
Well,
words,
okay.
being actually working
Yeah,
on one
but-
side from.
Yeah, but it's just amazing to me that still, to me, there's so much of that. Well, I guess it's the memory, but to me, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I guess I'm surprised because to me, they really ring true to the experience of observation.
That's good.
So I mean,
And
I'm like,
they, because it is, she did all of these, by the way, away from the place.
Yeah,
That's
there's
really
nothing,
important.
there's nothing here that's, I was standing.
right,
sitting
but
in front of.
they're very, well observed.
So do you feel they get closer to, I'm gonna use the word truth, it's a terrible word, but closer to your sense of sensation? By
I hope so.
being
I
memory?
mean, I actually, put a painting of another view of arches. It's in the middle of that wall. Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's a much more neutralized, more modeled version of the painting above it. It's almost the same composition. I mean, it is the same composition. Thank you, Lynn.
Where can people see it?
So
Mhm.
I did that. I did some drawings of the subject matter first. I did a few drawings of the individual forms in those rocks, and then the whole composition in different ways. And then I started with this painting, and that was fine. That helped me to understand the space and the forms, but it wasn't satisfying enough for me. So then I moved on to another version, same dimensions, but I adjusted the composition a little bit, and I heightened the color, and I used a little of the cut paper to achieve the kind of shapes that I was looking for. The plan was, and I have this big sheet of paper on my wall in the studio, was to make this yet another one version of this, much larger, going more in that direction of that painting. I never got there. So when I say I haven't really resolved, I just haven't gotten as far as I want to in terms of what I want to do with that subject matter.
Well, in that one over there, you get pretty far into it, I think. The one of the rocks back
The
there.
rocks, yeah.
What I was aiming for, what I was aiming for in that one, which I don't think I got to yet, is I was looking to get this sense of in that part of Arches National Park, there's a section where you're walking to this very narrow passageway where the rocks are very, very tall, and they're really towering over you. It's kind of like walking down 57th Street, 53rd Street or something, from east-west, you have big skyscrapers. It's that sensation of these things rising up above you, and all you see, you have this sensation of the sky in there somewhere above you during this cavernous space, narrow space. And I was aiming for that, but I don't feel like it. So that would be the next step.
So you can keep working on
I
that.
can keep working.
And then you wanted to.
I have a question about the pools, because what strikes me about the pools is that they're all from the same, the point of view is all the same. I mean, you may be closer, or you may be further away, but there's nothing that deviates from that point of view. And I was wondering, is that a function of memory, or is it a function of the photographs that you saw?
Oh, these aren't the photographs.
No, I know they're not from photographs, but you had some photographs of the pool, I believe you said? Oh,
No,
maybe I'm
just of the desert painting.
just of the desert painting. So is that pure, that's a function of memory only, and that's why the point of view is always similar?
Yeah, the point of view has to do with the best view that the pool offers, because there's a lot of junk on the other side of the pool. I mean, there's chairs and there's pool furniture, umbrellas. These are finding.
So things that you did not want
Things I didn't want,
to
it
depict.
could be nice to paint that, I just didn't want to. I wanted something very, very austere. Now, the other thing about this pool is, it's a really beautiful pool. It's not totally rectangular. It has these rectangular
Branches or
wings, thank you. Wings. So it has a lot of nice features as a pool, but I was not interested in that aspect of it. So on this view of the pool, you have shrubs and trees that do a lot of interesting things that I could work with, that I was interested in working with. And so that's
So that goes back to the selecting of subject matter.
selecting the subject matter. I was thinking more broadly in those terms because this is more selecting compositional shape things. So that's
Also, the house is is a wonderful shape against the pool, and this human presence of being.
it's like the only human presence.
No, I love the looming, the house there, that I see that as another person, like looking out behind at the back of the stage of this scene here.
That's a nice way to see it.
Yeah.
What's funny about that? What's funny about that is that house. This is Connecticut. It's a very tony part of our house. Is not. It's a little house, but it's a very tony part of Connecticut. And that house actually is a McMansion. It is giant.
It's lovely. I'm
It's
sorry.
It's
Looks like such a
so
nice
you
house. You can knock it down to size.
That's the way I would like that house to be, because that one actually, there was a house many years ago on that piece of property that was a nice little house. You know, tore it down, put this monster. But anyway, yeah, it had that nice little pink accent that I liked.
I think that painting is really beautiful, and you know, when I saw it, I kept looking at that painting. It's got so much in it. It's so rich, and there's a kind of a metaphysical quality I feel about it, and you know, and I love hearing what you said about your memories of that pool. I also love to swim, and I have pool memories too. I prefer open water, but I do have lots of pool memories. And that green of the water is so inviting, and it's sort of permeable and impermeable at the same time. You know, it's just like it's like a repository for all this memory and whatever is in your psyche that goes back through your history. You know?
Well, I also think about, I mean, apart from this pool, I do have memories as a kid of traveling, you know, with my parents and staying at motels and always being so excited because there'd be a pool there. And just the idea of a pool was, as a kid, you know, it's like this giant magical place to be, and then spending days in a not necessarily pool, lakes or whatever. You just want to be all day in the water. So to me, it has that sense.
It's a wonderful, and I think that the fact that it's nighttime kind of adds to that subconscious quality.
Yeah.
Of going inward.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of air, you know, that goes like from the house through this painting. I mean, the simplicity and the complexity, I think, just work really beautiful.
And I know Tina wants to add.
So something I'm noticing in these two themes is that the pool in the suburban area, which reminds me of John Cheever and John Updike stories, it feels lonely. And being alone in the desert feels very full. All these jazzy
You know, you're never alone in those national parks. All my pictures, I avoid avoided people like the plague, so that they all look like it's, you know, virgin territory, but it ain't.
But there's something that just feels lonely versus not lonely. That's a place that I
That's
feel
interesting.
all the shapes are just
Is
welcoming.
it about loneliness or going inward? Like
Yeah.
the pools are going inward
Yeah.
and are in a
They're
closed
still.
space, and they're
There's-
still.
Yes,
But
there's a
they're deep.
stillness, even with the waves. There's almost a stillness because it is empty of people.
Yeah, I found the pool paintings, because, you know, a lot of people say the minute they see the pools, they say, hot. So I love those paintings, but I was thinking, what am I doing differently than Hockney? And I thought, yeah, mine are really people-less, and even his paintings that are people-less feel like there's the presence of people, and I sort of feel that these are not that.
These are swimming in the water.
That these are really just a bit more abstract, which when one says that, I guess what I think of is it's more distilled from
Yeah, the stillness great word for these paintings. Yeah.
But I come back to the observation that, was it Lynn who said that the house in the distance almost takes I won't say quite anthropomorphic, but there is a sense of kind of a living presence
Somebody lives
that we feel to the house. But I'm not even thinking, okay, there are people in the house. I'm thinking that the house has a kind of an animate quality.
But isn't that part of the whole suburban sense that you're never quite alone? You're
Right.
in
There's always a
a
house
place that has been manufactured by people versus a
Yes.
place in the desert where even if there are a lot of people, you really feel the awe of nature and of
Well,
space.
I would actually disagree a little bit because I feel that same sense of animation and
Oh, yeah.
projection of human spirit in the rock formations. It's not the same, but to me, both of them, okay, so in my own experience, people have said to me, when I paint urban landscape, why don't you paint the people? And I'm like, I don't need the people. The buildings are the people, the cars are the people. I don't need the people. But I feel in Monica's paintings, the house is the people, the rocks are the people.
Okay.
So that's how I'm
And the
kind of,
pool is people.
and the pool,
And the pool
To
is-
me, it is a big people.
But it-
Encompassing.
but,
Peter, do you want to ask your question?
Well, I was just noting that some of these large rock forms are quite phallic.
Oh, yeah, that question.
I figured it's 5 o'clock.
There's no
People have
question.
pointed that out about some of my paintings, particularly those that were, my invented paintings of the
Oh, interesting.
early 2000s. People have said, oh, they're very phallic, they're very sexual.
Maybe it's just
Must be.
maybe this is a good moment to get up and have one more question?
I'm
Sure.
interested, you mentioned you did some cutout. I assume, for what I see around me, collage is not your thing.
Collage?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I
So
have a history of hundreds and hundreds of collage going
So
back.
I feel that
There are
that
actually some of the
particular
best
example will
examples.
lend toward collage, you know.
There's some beautiful collages, some of which
I
were
brought
made.
some in so that if
Thank you.
anybody's interested, I have some binders at the desk there. You
My
can-
mother moved from oils and then into acrylic, and the collage couldn't stand stretch canvas anymore.
I think we can continue kind of informally, and I think maybe it's time to stretch and have a glass of wine. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for coming.